My name is Ruth Summers. I'm from the Sloan Fellows class of 2001. And today I have the honor of introducing our first keynote speaker, Judy Lewent, retired Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Merck. Before I go into her bio, I want to also recognize Judy as a powerful piece of the Sloan Women's New York group. She graciously came and spoke and packed the room to capacity, and that's when we all knew we were onto something. And it was wonderful to have her there and see everybody respond to her discussion. So Judy was responsible for worldwide financial, corporate development and licensing matters, as well as for strategic planning at Merck. She was also responsible for the Johnson & Johnson Merck consumer pharmaceuticals and Mario joint venture relationships and the Merck ongoing relationships with Astra and DuPont. She was chairman of Merck Capital Ventures. Judy was a member of Merck's executive committee, senior management group, which evaluates and makes strategic decisions for the company. Her appointment to CFO in 1990 made her the first woman to serve as the CFO of a major corporation. She retired from Merck in 2007, but continues to work, on the board of directors for GlaxoSmithKline, Thermo Fisher Scientific, and Motorola Solutions. She is a trustee of the Rockefeller Family Trust, a member of the MIT Corporation, and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Judy earned a Bachelor's of Science in Economics from Goucher College and an MS in Management from MIT Sloan in 1972. Please join me in welcoming Judy.
Thank you, Ruth, and good morning. Whereas when we were together a couple of years ago, I had fun just speaking extemporaneously. I decided with this big a gathering, I better not do that in the beginning. So I have written a few notes to at least keep them a little more structured, and then we'll take it from there. So I am honored to be asked to speak on the journey from MIT Sloan and back, Life and Leadership Lessons. That was a suggested title which I accepted, and here we go. What I do hope to do in my introductory remarks is to set the stage for an interactive Q&A, just like the great one you heard right before. So to begin, it's impressive and inspiring to see so many Sloan women here today. A lot different from the Sloan I attended in 1970. Then there were not 44% women. There weren't even 10% women in the class, barely single digits. And what isn't different, though, between then and now, is why we all chose Sloan, and how it helped us chart and excite the course for our careers. I went to Sloan directly from college, something that is rare today, but it was essential for me then. Meaningful career opportunities for women with just an undergraduate degree were slim to none. I had dreams of a career in finance, and a master's from Sloan was to be my ticket. I was fortunate to be taught by Bob Merton, Stu Myers, Myron Scholes, to name a few. They brought visionary thinking supported by rigorous analytics to the classroom and left an indelible imprint on me. Throughout my career, analytical techniques such as Black-Scholes option pricing theory, Monte Carlo simulation, decision trees, and game theory have been central to ensuring that rigorous thinking forms the foundations of business decision-making. I started out in investment banking in 1972, where such concepts as Black-Scholes option pricing theory were foreign. I could tell you stories. Their eyes glazed over. I didn't want to tell you how they thought you valued an option. That's another story. I knew that I wanted to work in a different work environment, because there, someplace else, I could contribute, really applying the skills that I learned at Sloan. It would take several more jobs for me to find a receptive audience for advanced financial analytics as an imperative for quality decision-making. Perhaps, therefore, lesson number one, perseverance. Or as an early mentor of mine said, keep knocking on doors till one opens. What I finally found was a career in the pharmaceutical industry. There, my passion for finance could be applied to the many roles which I held. First finance officer in the R&D labs, establishing a group for capital evaluation and acquisition analysis, treasurer, and CFO. Many people cite passion as a key to professional accomplishment and success. I agree, of course. However, reflecting on this talk today, I thought I must add that being part of an organization with the mission to improve global human health brings another critical dimension to one's career: meaning and purpose. As an example, when I was to play a role to ensure that the R&D investment at Merck was not only sufficient and well spent. In the 1980s, Merck was interested in assessing the return on R&D. Then they were spending a mighty $350 million a year. I was convinced that Monte Carlo simulation was the perfect technique for this, given the risk and uncertainty for pharma R&D. With a big team of analysts, huge group, and yes, many of them key punchers for the computer model and the input, we built a Monte Carlo simulation of each project in the portfolio and the total value of and the return on R&D investment. It was a great pioneering effort then, and it required a great deal of salesmanship and education in the organization to get buy-in for this tool. And now, only 30 years later, Monte Carlo simulations and other financial analytics are all the vogue in many pharma companies as they grapple with the perennial portfolio decisions in R&D. So lesson learned, perseverance paid off. Let me touch on another lesson involving the courage of one's conviction based on sound principles and resilience and the long-term thinking. There had been and continues to be heated debate among companies, academics, bankers, and investors regarding capital structure. Many believe the greater the leverage, the better. Drawing on my Sloan experience, as well as continued discussions with Sloan faculty such as Stu Myers, Merck Finance executed a rigorous review of the empirical and theoretical evidence to develop the correct capital structure policy for Merck. We asserted that given the high business risk of the pharmaceutical industry, we should not assume additional financial risk by leveraging the company's balance sheet. Many on the board challenged that conclusion, given the conventional wisdom about leverage. Fortunately, the board accepted our analysis and our recommendation prevailed. In 2004, when Merck decided to voluntarily withdraw buyouts because of the results of the clinical trial, the stock dropped precipitously, and some analysts were estimating the potential liability as high as $50 billion. This challenge to Merck's viability was mitigated by the decision which we took to retain financial flexibility and a strong balance sheet. Merck withstood the onslaught from the plaintiff's bar, assured investors that the dividend was secure, and employees that Merck could continue to invest in its business. Furthermore, when the news about buyouts broke, a period of several years of extremely adverse publicity ensued. It was debilitating for all affected. The company weathered the storm. The adverse publicity and the litigation ended, and the news about Merck returned to stories that are emblematic of the company, such as launching the first vaccine to prevent cervical cancer and groundbreaking immunotherapy for cancer. Now, no discussion at a Sloan conference would be complete without referencing lifelong learning. Two key examples for me are my experience on boards of directors and decades of connections with Sloan faculty, students, and alumni. I've served on 6 public company boards since 1994. Quaker Oats, Motorola, Dell, Thermo Fisher Scientific, GlaxoSmithKline, and Motorola Solutions. These board roles have given me perspectives on different management styles, board dynamics, navigating business challenges, and more. I look forward to exploring these facets of being an effective director next with our distinguished panel. Therefore, let me focus on one lesson, namely, what are the elements of a successful or failed strategy? Thermo Fisher provides an example of a successful strategy. Thermo understands its core competencies and customers. 10 years ago, it decided to leverage these by being an industrial consolidator. They have executed on this strategy with financial discipline and expertise in integration. In that 10-year time frame, $30 billion was deployed on complementary acquisitions, which strengthened Thermo's customer offering. Revenues doubled from $9 billion to $18 billion. Earnings grew faster at a compound rate of 13%. R&D spend increased from $240 million to over $750 million. And the share price appreciated at a compound annual growth rate of over 12%, far outstripping the growth rate of the S&P of about 5% in that same period. In contrast, one could look at the history of the mobile device business at legacy Motorola. Motorola invented the mobile phone, had the engineering vision and business risk appetite to create a revolution in communication. I remember early board discussions where the board challenged management in disbelief that they had forecast that hundreds of millions of cell phones would be sold globally. Well, as you know, since the introduction of the first cell phone by Motorola in 1992, over 17 billion have been sold, approximately 1.5 billion just in 2016. But what is equally instructive is what followed. Motorola was proud of its engineering prowess and had a strong culture. The negative aspect of that culture was that technology shifts were downplayed, for example, analog to digital. Consumer preferences were not a priority. Similar to the first Fords, you could have any color Motorola phone you wanted as long as it was black. And disruptive technologies were acknowledged too slowly. Witness the progression and advent of the smartphone. In the end, Motorola had about a 3% market share, basically from 100. Separated the mobile device business in 2011, and this iconic brand is now owned by Lenovo. I have to conclude with Sloan. It's where this journey began, and it has been an invaluable part of my life for 4 decades. I continue to be enriched by staying current with the latest research in finance, strategy, economics, and more. Indeed, Sloan has been a constant resource throughout my career. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you. I was interested in understanding your perspective around how you saw women within a company like Merck really get recognized. There was a really interesting and somewhat discouraging article that I read last week, I think it was in the New York Times, that talked about this thin file for women, which really gets to why women don't progress or get promoted in large organizations as quickly as men. And it seems we haven't made enough progress because a lot of the more visible assignments aren't the ones that go to women, and so that sort of builds on itself. So I'm just interested, given that you probably had to battle a fair amount to get to where you did, how did you position yourself, and what advice might you have?
Okay. Let's start from the beginning. Following up on some of the earlier questions, I do think that the first thing, the fundamental thing for anybody is some kind of well-grounded technical competence. So the soft stuff comes later, but if you don't know what you're doing, the rest of it is irrelevant, okay? So you have to start by being able to contribute in a way that adds value for the reason you were hired. So you're hired usually in a junior position, okay? So the first thing for me was, basically as I noted, it was, Merck was the 4th or 5th company I worked for in a period of 8 years. And when I got to Merck, people said, you better calm down here now because you can't keep doing this, right? You can't keep jumping around. And oh, by the way, at Merck, we don't remember your name until you've been here 5 years. Okay. So what do you do? You first try to make a difference, and some of it means taking risks. So Monte Carlo simulation. I thought, again, this was a great solution, and I was looking for problems to solve. Early on in my first job, I found some really interesting capital evaluations, and I remember getting some support to do a small one, and I went into my boss and I said, look at this, and he said, oh, you know, that's really interesting, but no one's going to understand that. What I realized later was he didn't understand it, and he didn't want it going outside of his office because he was going to be embarrassed. So you have to, you keep plowing along, you keep trying to make a difference, you keep trying to distinguish yourself by, adding value. At some point, though, I was very fortunate. When I became the first finance officer in the research labs, the person who was running the labs was about 2 years away from being CEO. And we hit it off. So he, and again, a lot of people talk about mentorship. I never really had a lot of mentorship, but I had sponsorship, okay? And he stood up. My boss, obviously, was the one who also saw the capability, and he stood up and said she could be treasurer. And the CEO loved the idea. He loved upsetting the apple cart anyway, So, and the pushback from his senior group, which was all men, was, oh, there are other guys in finance who've been there longer, and it'll upset them. And he said, that's your only argument, this discussion's over, right? And so that changed the whole trajectory, right, of getting in a position now where I could start to make a difference too. So I think it was either when I was treasurer or the first year I was CFO, I'm not sure. I said it would be great to bring women together because Merck is pretty spread out, and there were a lot of women in the company and in finance. And the way, informally as opposed to formal mentorship programs, which we did launch later, is getting to know each other and having a network and having that kind of support. So we decided to have an evening where we bring everyone together. The CEO saw me in the lobby at night, said, where are you going? I told him where we were going. He said, okay. He said, please let me know when you take over, because when all these women are getting together. And he meant it in a supportive way. The guys in Merck Finance were livid. They said, what is this women of Merck stuff? We're going to be men at Merck. We're going to be mom. And you go, okay, give it a rest, guys. Get a life, okay? And so that was more informal, and it was very successful, and it was energizing. More formally, then, your question. Merck was really very good about a lot of commitment to diversity and a lot of excellent processes to support that, right? 360s, which we could talk about, yes, but okay. But we would rigorously go through a review of our talent in finance with my team, right? And made sure that we had the right development plans for each person, made sure we understand the aspirations of each person and constraints, geographical constraints or whatever. And we consciously look to develop everyone in the organization. In concert with that, you have to consciously make sure, and here's the tough thing that I think organizations this very day have difficulty with, and that is, anytime a job is open, you should have a diverse slate, okay? And you need support from the top to enforce that, because invariably, in organizations, you've got pressure, right? You need to get a job done. As the years have gone by, you get fewer and fewer resources. You don't have a lot of slack, okay? So when you have a choice of, I want to put someone in who is ready to do the job today, versus invest in someone who might be great, with maybe 6 months of training and not going up the learning curve, it's tempting. People slip back into, I'm just going to be expedient. And it's only the senior management that has to guard against that and say, no, every one of these jobs has to have a diverse slate, and you're going to have to be accountable for this, and we're going to monitor progress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's really, fundamental. Now I will say, shifting to board roles, last part of my answer. It was really heartening to be part of the succession process that GlaxoSmithKline this year. It was an orderly process. We looked inside and outside. The board was heavily involved. Because of my committee roles, was on the event, avant-garde of this and much more involved. But anyway, in the end, the board unanimously decided that a woman who was inside the organization was the one to be the next CEO. That is amazing because of a lot of investor pressure and conventional wisdom that, whatever the good or the bad or the ugly was for Glaxo in the last 10 years under Sir Andrew Liddy's leadership, outside has to be better. Shake it up. I love this, that only an outsider can be a change agent. The whole thing is nuts, okay. So you had that pressure, and you had the fact that the person we finally named was not pharma expertise. And this is a pharma company, and pharma is not a simple business. But through a thorough vetting process, we came to a unanimous decision, and she's off to a great start. Whether we got there on pure merit and an excellent process, undoubtedly, but also the board has a heavy representation of women on it. Yes?
I'd love to go back to the moment you mentioned where you took the analysis to your boss and he didn't understand it. So I've experienced that a number of times in a different context in high-tech startups, but I haven't successfully overcome that. Eventually, if the person above me is doing that, I just laughed, unfortunately. I'd love to know if you have any tips for, what did you do at that point? Did you try to figure out a different way to explain it? Did you just sort of take a step back and wait till you get to a different part of the organization?
I decided to live to fight another day, and the next job I had, in this case, so two things. There was a very, very senior person in the Merck organization who was my boss's boss, okay, who was feared by everyone. He was a tough guy, right? But he was maybe 6 months from retirement. And I went up to speak with him about something, I forget what it was, and one thing led to another, and I started to tell him about this. And he said, that sounds really interesting. I said, okay, wait here, I'm gonna go get the printout and I'll show you. And he loved it, he went, wow, so it can be done. Now, of course, then he cycled off. So the real breakthrough was when I got to research. Because scientists use Monte Carlo simulation. Scientists aren't daunted by, complex analytics, right? And so you married that with the fact that they're absolutely fascinated with what drives the stock price. So we had a great complementary relationship. I'm fascinated with understanding science and breakthroughs in medical research. And I remember taking walks around the parking lot in the middle of scientific meetings going, Judy, when will the stock move? And I explained something very simple, like when a couple of these drugs get approved. And then, of course, they did, and the stock went up, and they went, wow! It's really not that, I didn't need Sloan to teach me that. But it was with that foundation in research that I had a platform. And the tough part was, bring back memories. The tough part was really getting the buy-in from the marketing and sales side, because I'm not doing the forecast. I'm just bringing a technique. You need quality inputs. I don't ever want to hear from anyone, garbage in, garbage out. Yes, I understand that, okay? But you have a tool, but you need quality inputs. And there was a lot of skepticism and a lot of unfamiliarity with what I was asking people to do. So I was lucky to find a few people in senior positions who would support getting the right inputs. And at one point I thought, I'll make it easy. We came up with a desktop model for the marketing people to put in the ranges and stuff and really see what the sales trajectory would look like, so it could be a little more user-friendly. And they felt threatened and said that was a terrible thing. So anyway, it's not, you have to know, I'm not a marketing person, I probably should have known my customers better, but it did take time. It took time. And so, the first year I had the printout, I sat down with one of the senior marketing guys and I showed him, and he said something very wise to me. He said, "This is great, and in 5 years it'll be even better." And I thought, oh my God, we worked so hard on this, what do you mean 5 years from now it'll be better? But it was, and by the time I was getting close to the end of my career at Merck, the output of that model served as the foundation for the budget meetings between the commercial people and the research people. And, you know, talking about crying, I almost welled up. It was like, okay, it only took 29 years, but here it is, you know. So, anyway, it takes time.
You mentioned that you were on 6 boards in
Yes.
your career. I was wondering how you got on the first one.
Yes, well, as it was nicely noted in the introduction, I became CFO of Merck, and I'm a woman in 1990, and the phone rang. And I had a pact with the CEO, who was, you know, my sponsor, Dr. Boris Vagelos, is one of the great people, period, full stop. He said, okay, he was supportive of it. He said, I encourage you to do it, but let's do this. When you get some companies you're actually interested in, let's sit down and talk about it, and the pros and cons, and, you know, I'll be, you know, your sounding board. I said, that's great. So a couple of the earlier companies, there were a lot of red flags, and I went, oh no. Anyway, and then Quaker came along, and I thought, from a quality of product, culture, values, kind of what I could learn about the company, I thought this might make sense. And when I sat down with Roy, he said, yes, I like this because pharma has to get a better appreciation of the end customer, the patient, the consumer. And so this is maybe a great way, you know, to add another dimension of your learning in that regard, which was right. So, of course, Roy always saw trends that were 10 and 20 and 30 years out, but which is sometimes good and sometimes not good. But that's really what started. And as you know, the other part of that issue, which is just like everything else, whether it's, you know, being a CFO or CEO or board member, is more often than not, people want people who've had experience on boards, right? So once you have one, then it leads to the other, right? But that's sort of the background.
Thank you so much for your remarks. One thing that caught my attention is that, you know, the topic of the conference is ideas that matter. And you talked about how long it took you to take an idea that mattered and eventually led to so many good decisions and profits, eventually, prosperity, which is part of what we're here to before running business. And I'm wondering your opinion in terms of, is it what it takes that for, you know, business is one of those professions that anyone that starts to come in can kind of like get around, as opposed to you're a doctor and you have to have those credentials, right? Your credentials. So there are many different ways that we get to business. My point is, in business, because of that natural diversity of the area, as well as the diversity of the population in terms of levels of understanding, intelligence, acceptance of diversity, is it what it takes, like the time and the perseverance? Or after all the experiences you had, do you see ways that we can accelerate getting ideas that matter to bang?
I think an underlying theme of what I was saying too, in all the questions, is it's a partnership. You can have great ideas, you need a receptive audience. And that's not always easy to find. So I've also always felt, you know, not everyone in an organization is enlightened, not everyone is an enlightened manager. And at some point you also learn that life is too short. So, you know, I'm not going to try to reform someone who can't work well with a woman. That's not worth my time. Let's go to someplace where the environment is right, where they're supportive, and that my ideas and contributions can flourish. Right? And that's really, no one really works for a corporation. You work for a group of people, right? And your life, and a lot has been written about, what keeps people in companies, and it's not necessarily top of the list pay. It's the people with whom they work. It's the meaning, how they feel when they come into the office each day that keeps them there and makes them productive. So it's really just finding that, and it always starts at the basic level, right? And then if you're fortunate and you rise up in the organization, then your sphere of influence can get larger. But that doesn't also mean that, as the challenges become bigger, that the same attributes don't need to be there. Right? I mean, you need to have a spine. You need to understand what you think is right and have the courage of your convictions. And I can give you lots of other stories where people were, let me be polite, skeptical. And if I had just bowed to what they thought at the time, a lot of great things, and I'm not taking credit for it, but a lot of really important things wouldn't have happened. So, it's that balance too. Right in the back? Oh.
Hi, thank you. So I loved your point about courage of conviction, and I have a two-part question as follow-up. So one is, can you share a little bit about how you found your authoritative voice? So from going to building expertise to being the expert. And the second piece is, I don't know if you can think of times when you were wrong and continue to feel like I do have courage of conviction in other areas.
First part, how do you build an authoritative voice? It's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. It's just sort of maybe my upbringing. I don't know. I mean, I'm the oldest. I'm the only girl. I went to an all-girls high school, of which I'm extremely proud. Hunter College High School in New York, which is one spectacular institution with which I continue to be involved and support. And that was a major enabler. I think in certain environments, all-female education is a real enabler and gives you that courage of conviction and gives you the confidence to do those things. So I'd probably, go back to that. I think on doing things wrong, I am my own worst enemy. I'm extremely self-critical. Any little thing that isn't, that I think I could have done better, believe me, I'm introspective and I critique it. But that doesn't change. I think maybe it's the complement to the conviction. It doesn't change what you are in your core. Because you should be self-aware and you should learn, as everyone says, but it's true. You learn from those kinds of mistakes, and it's all continuous education. And if you haven't made mistakes, then you're probably not awake. Yes?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going back to how you describe your success and hurdle in trying to push initiatives. And I'm expecting bringing in Monte Carlo techniques in a group or organization is not that easy. And sometimes I feel in my career, you meet having the MIT Sloan brand behind you helps you a lot as an asset, and sometimes it may hurt you because some guy maybe didn't get into MIT, so and so it becomes like a threat to them. So could you tell us how you were able to leverage the MIT brand, of course, in combination with all your perseverance, and of course, like you said, you still have to know the stuff. But how did the MIT brand help you to leverage your
Sure.
ideas?
So, first, a silly story. My undergraduate college no one's ever heard of. So when I was going to business school, I thought, well, I've got to pick one where I don't have to go through this nonsense. And for the next, well, up until this day, people will go, I didn't know MIT had a business school. It's like, oh. So I'm not sure I'm leveraging, and you don't walk around with your resume on your chest, right? So I really would come back to what I alluded to at the end of my talk, and it's serious. I have gone back to MIT Sloan constantly for recruiting, for meeting with faculty. The faculty were core in a lot of things that we did, whether it was the capital structure work, quite frankly, a lot of great work we did on hedging for foreign exchange, where Don Lassard was a partner in that. I was encouraged by some of the people at Sloan also to publish on some of that, and I had help. So there are lots of different ways, and I also brought over time lots of great faculty from Sloan in for professional development for my team. It was in the fiber of what we did, and I think, quite frankly, that the people in Merck Finance really valued that. They valued having that kind of expertise and intellectual challenge and outside perspective to enrich what they were doing during the day. So I think I would think of it in that way.
Thank you so much for being here. So while you mentioned that scientists are indeed data-driven, there's a huge emotional component to drug development.
Yes.
So my question is, how did you handle the egos of the scientists who are primarily, if not some, all of them are men, particularly when it came to the portfolio trade-offs?
Well, let's see. I would, an ongoing issue in pharma research, which I think is, I wouldn't quite call it the ego per se, but it's a little bit, since a lot of the scientists come from an academic setting, and I don't mean to tell tales out of school for MIT and other places, but they tend to harbor their resources. Right? They jealously guard whatever funding they have. So transparency into the R&D budget is probably the holy grail, right? So I would say from that standpoint, when you get to the portfolio analysis, as I mentioned, finally in the end, where you have commercial, and now you're in pharma, I should say. Most in pharma are talking about all kinds of end-to-end, where you want end-to-end from basic through the end of development. You want end-to-end between R&D and commercial, because you can't make intelligent choices without that, and you need to communicate more. And there are rivalries and different stereotypes that scientists have versus commercial people and stuff like that you have to iron out, and that takes time. And you have to iron out, again, the old NIH syndrome, not invented here, of recognizing that maybe some really great science is outside of your lab, and you should allocate some of your budget to bringing that in. These are perennial challenges. I would say that the way, in the end, the reason I'm passionate about Monte Carlo or its simpler child of decision trees, which I think are easier for people to sort of walk through and understand, is having some analytics in front of people. I'm just a big believer that facts sort of help. And having analytics in front of people, and not just the outcome of a Monte Carlo simulation, but the key assumptions, right, of what do you have to believe for that to be true. Let's talk about what's really driving these results. And I'm just, finance is just the aggregator, and hopefully can present it in a clear way. But the stakeholders have to be at the table talking about the trade-offs and what it means. And so, that's how the process works. And I was not being facetious. I mean, I see it now at GSK and other places where finally, really, quality financial analysis is coming to mainstream for all of the stakeholders to think through, what do we have here? And again, it's not the absolute number. it's the insights of what's driving it. It's the relative values. It's things like that that help you understand sort of, you know, where you place your bets.
Hi, I'm Jean Elliott. I'm a member of the alumni board here at Sloan. And thank you for coming and delivering these remarks today. But I'd also like to thank you for the philanthropy that you've done, especially in recent years, that has really helped to support the annual fund and helped us to deliver fellowships to many women and men as well that we really want to have as students and as future alumni. I guess, are there any life and leadership lessons you'd like to pass along in that philanthropy or any other form of philanthropy?
Thank you for your comments. It's a great question. So the first is, I'll say what I won't say, what I think is the wrong answer, which is giving back. I think that's not the way to think about these things. It has to be meaningful to you. It has to be something that you feel is important for the betterment of the community over the long term. And if you are in a position to do something, you know, and that's permeated, you know, my life, right? And places like Merck and GSK, these are core to how they operate, that you're a member of a community, and you therefore also have to be focused. You have to pick your spots. You know, if you just do a little bit all over the place, you know, the sprinkling isn't going to get you to, you know, it's maybe not the best way to use your resources. So you have to make choices. You have to decide what's most meaningful to you. There are so many important choices, but for me, really from K through graduate school, for STEM, for economics, for finance, I think these are important enablers of the long-term viability of the world economy. So that's just an area that I know and love better than, you know, some others, and that's how I pick my spots. But there's so many important, deserving organizations, and, you know, Martha touched a little bit about, you know, being in a tunnel with headsets on. Now more than ever, you know, in the environment, now more than ever, there are so many worthwhile organizations that need private support. So making the tough choices is really the issue, not having the initiative and desire to be, you know, have some role of philanthropy. Thank you.